Hello again, it's Mrs. Hoekstra. I am on Module 1, Lesson 13, Finding Equivalent Ratios Given the Total Quantity. It's page 51 in our book, and you'll notice that I already have the essential question typed in. How can you calculate the missing information in a table that includes the total quantity? How can you calculate the missing information in a table that includes the total quantity? While you're writing that down, I'm also going to draw your attention to the fact that I've already crossed out all of exercise or example 1. Not a fan of it. It's a good question. It's just really tricky and some really messy numbers in it. And I don't feel that it's necessarily going to be the best thing for us to do. So I'm going to skip over to page 52. All right, so when you have the essential question, go ahead, flip over to page 52. And we're going to start with example 2. Now remember, this whole book, this whole module has all been about proportions. So we're going to look for proportions in these tables to help us make our calculations. So example 2 says, when a business buys a fast food franchise, it is buying the recipes used at every restaurant with the same name. So for example, Pizzeria Specialty House restaurants have different owners, but they all must use the same recipes for the pizza, the sauce, the bread, etc. All right. That's why every Domino's, they all taste the same. That's why every Papa John's all taste the same, right? All those chains, they all taste the same, even though different people own them. You are now working at your local Pizzeria Specialty House restaurant. And listed below are the amounts of meat used on one Meat Lovers pizza. Okay, so first thing it asks, what's the total? Like how much, what's the grand total of all the meat that's put onto this? Right? So what we're going to do is we're just going to add up all of those values just so I have an idea of what that grand total is. So I have 1/4 of a cup of sausage and 1/3 of a cup of pepperoni and 1/6 of a cup of bacon, 1/8 of a cup of ham, and 1/8 of a cup of beef. Now I notice that none of them have a common denominator, so that makes it a little tricky to add. However, I do know that 1/8 plus 1/8, right? That is equal to 2/8 because they have a common denominator, and 2/8 reduces to 1/4. So I'm going to take that 1/4 and I'm going to add it to the other 1/4 that's already there, that's already given to me at the beginning, right? This one over here. Bring it over here so you see where I got it from, that 1/4. And then I have the 1/3 and the 1/6 still. All right, 1/4 and 1/4 is 1/2, right? It's 2/4. 2/4 becomes a half, plus 1/3. Plus 1/6. What would be a good common denominator? I think that would be 6. So 1/2 would be 3/6. 1/3 would be 2/6. And then I have the 1/6 still left over. Oops, sorry, that's all crammed in there. 3/6 plus 2/6 plus 1/6. All you do is just add the numerators. All right, so 3 plus 2 is 5 plus 1 is 6. So this is equal to 6 over 6. And 6 divided by 6 is 1. So this is 1 cup of meat on that whole thing. So it probably is a small little pizza there. All right, the meat must be mixed using that exact same ratio to ensure that customers will receive the same great tasting Meat Lovers pizza from every Pizzeria Specialty House restaurant nationwide. The table below shows 3 different orders for Meat Lover pizza on Super Bowl Sunday, right? Busiest day for a pizza place. Using the amounts and total for one pizza given above, right, using those amounts from above, fill in the row and column of the table so that the mixture tastes the same. All right, so we want to keep all those ratios the same. Now remember, a minute ago, we said that our sausage was 1/4 of a cup. And now I have 1 whole cup. So that means I multiplied this by 4, right? 1/4 times 4 would equal 1, right? So that means I'm going to be able to calculate this whole first order by knowing that I'm going to multiply by 4. If I take all of those originals, which I think I'm going to go back and write those in, right? This is 1/3, this was 1/6, this is 1/8, and beef was 1/8. Okay? So I'm going to take all these and multiply them all by 4 to get this column. And let's check. 1/8 times 4 is 4/8. 4/8 equals 1/2. And I know that if I multiply, I should get these two to be identical. Okay, so let's see here. 1/3 times 1/4. Well, you just multiply the numerators because this is really just 4 over 1, and that becomes 4/3. 1/6 times 4, well, again, that just becomes 4 over 1, and so that becomes 4/6, which reduces to 2/3. Okay? So if I take all this and add it all up, I should get, by the way, this is 1 1/3. Okay? This together, these two together is 1 whole cup, right? These two together make 2 cups because 1 1/3 plus 2/3 is 2 cups, and then the one up there. So 1, 2, 3, 4 cups, grand total for that first order. All right, let's take a look at that second order. In order for me to calculate that one, I have to base it off of, excuse me, I have to base it off of that bacon. So how do I get 1/6 to become a 1? Well, I have to multiply by 6. Okay, so I'm going to take that first value, that 1/6 times 6, and equal it to 1. So I'm going to take all these values with 1/4 and multiply by 6, and I get 6/4. Okay, and then I have 1/3 times 6, and I get 6/3, also known as 2. And then over here, I have 1/8 times 6, that is 6/8. And then the same thing here, this will be 6/8 because these two are exactly the same. By the way, 6/8 does reduce to 3/4. And that 4/6 up there, 4 goes into 6 once with 2 left over, also known as 1 1/2. So now I just have to add these up. 1 1/2 plus 2 is 3 1/2, plus another 1 is 4 1/2. And then these two here combined is another 1 1/2 together. So I have a grand total of 6. All right, order 3. We've got to figure out that ratio or that proportion there. So if you notice, I can either use pepperoni or I can use beef. Either one will be fine. All right, probably going to be easier though to use the pepperoni because I'm sure you guys probably aren't fans of those fractions quite yet, but I'm working on it, get you guys used to them. So I'm going to take 1/3 times what will give me 3. Well, if I do it times 3, that only gets me 1. Right? 1/3 times 3 only gets me 1, and I need to get all the way to 3. So it's 1/3 times 9. 1/3 times 9 equals 3. So I'm going to take all these values and multiply by 9. So 1/4 times 9 equals 9/4, which is the same as 2 1/4. All right, 1/6 times 9 equals 9/6, or 1 3/6, or 1 1/2. Then I have 1 1/8 because these two are exactly the same. But I can do 1/8 times 9 and get 9/8, which then becomes 1 1/8. All right, now we have to add these all up. Let's see. This becomes 2 1/4. So if I add 2 1/4 and 2 1/4, and then my 3 and my 1 1/2, I end up with a grand total of 9. There we go. And everything is in ratio and proportion. All right, go over to the next page, right? And take a look at this exercise. Every time you see the word exercise, guess what I want you to do? That's right, I want you to try it on your own. All right, pause the video, give it a shot, turn the video back on and see if your answers are the same as mine. I will give you one hint. Okay, I'll read the problem and give you one hint. The table below shows 6 different size pans that could be used to make macaroni and cheese. Oh, I'm getting hungry. If the ratio of ingredients stays the same, how might the recipe be altered to account for the different size pans? Take a look at everything in the table. I have to keep that ratio all the same, right? That means I want to start there. That's going to give me my ratio that I am looking for. All right, give it a shot now. Hit pause. Did you hit pause? Hit pause. All right, so here's all my work. You'll notice that I started with a smiley face, right? You can begin by just taking 3 plus 3/4 and know that the grand total is 3 3/4. Pretty straightforward. Now, to find that ratio, that proportion, I took the 3 cups of noodles, so I wrote it as 3N, over 3/4 cup of cheese, so I wrote 3/4 C. Well, remember, when we divide, we're actually multiplying by the reciprocal. So I take that 3/4 and flip it and turn it into the 4/3, right? So then when I calculate it, I get 12 over 3, which is the ratio of 4 to 1. You'll notice the big arrow brings us up to the top. And so I get 4 cups of noodles, because that's my numerator, noodles, over 1 cup of cheese. Remember, I said cheese is my denominator. And 4 plus 1, sure enough, that does equal 5. So it works. Okay? So I kept using that ratio of 4 to 1 to calculate it. So I went to the third one down, my blue line, and I took 1/4 and I multiplied it by 4, because it is, the noodles is 4 times more than the cheese. And so I get 1 cup of noodles. Okay, when I add those two together, 1 plus 1/4, I get 1 1/4. Well, the purple one, I took the 2/3 and I divided it by 4, because I need to have it be 1/4 the size. Or you could multiply by 1/4. Dividing by 4 and multiplying by 1/4, they're the same thing. Depends on how your brain sees it. So I calculated that out. You can use your calculator, and you get 1/6. So I have 1/6. Now I turned the 2/3 into 4/6 so that I could easily add that up. 4/6 plus 1/6 is 5/6. Remember, you add the numerators as long as they have the same denominator. All right, now the red one, a little trickier as they kept going down, right? So I'm going to take 5 1/3 and divide by 4, like we did on the problem just above it, and I get 1 1/3. So when I add 5 1/3 plus 1 1/3, I get 6 2/3. Last one, I'm going to take that 5 5/8, definitely the hardest one, and I'm going to divide it by 4. That is going to give me my cheese. All right, so I got the cheese, so that one's going to be the 1 1/8 in the center there. And then I just have to subtract 5 5/8 minus 1/8, and I should get 4 4/8, also known as 4 1/2. All right, these are a little tricky, so take your time, be really cautious as you go through them and work on the homework in class. If you have questions, please be sure to ask me when you get there. Have a great day.